he makes about $40 on the publication of The Raven.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while we pondered, weak and weary, we had a question, nay, a query we could not forgo, a query about Edgar Allan Poe. I am Jason Burns.
And I'm Danny Nucci, and this is the What About podcast, and we're talking about Edgar Allan Poe today.
The Raven was first published in 1845, and, as creatives, Danny, I got to thinking, isn't that kind of like the goal, where you create something that lasts beyond you? And here we are talking about Edgar Allan Poe, who only lived 40 years, well beyond that death date.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that we ended the conversation with, what would be his legacy, and I think of, if Edgar Allan Poe were alive today, the kind of hit that The Raven was, and the kind of adoration that he got, if that was like a hit song, is kind of cool. And I think there'd be an entire, we'd have like, how like there's Swifties, there'd be the emo version for Edgar Allan Poe. And because of this interview, I also went back and reread The Raven, and
it's heavy stuff. Yeah,
something else, man. Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's so funny because it's you think of it as a cliche thing. Oh yeah, but it really is. It has depth, man.
But as a writer, I get so bummed out hearing, like, I had no idea, which we cover in this interview with Enrica Jang, but just how little money he received for that. It's kind of scarring.
Yeah, which what I was reading is that, he's like, running around kind of like in today's society, unless you're, you have a specific career, in the arts, he's just trying to, mix and match and do a little editing, do a little magazine writing, do some criticism. I mean, he's just trying to make a living, trying to scrape out a living. And the other thing that I thought was really, really, really important that she said was, this is not a guy who's just inspired to write this, sort of full of depth kind of macabre writing. This is a guy that was well studied and understood writing as a craft and honed his craft to the point where he could specifically break somebody's writing down in a way that was brutal. But there's something to be said for the cliche of preparation and inspiration.
Well, and now you can go wear a pair of Edgar Allan Poe socks if you so choose, because the legacy carries forward.
Go into the gift shop and get your Edgar Allan Poe bobblehead. Anyway, the well-informed Enrica Jang. Enrica Jang, not to be mistaken with Erica.
Not an Erica.
How many times does that happen in a day?
A lot.
I bet it does. Not to start with a sore subject, but I had to make sure it was Enrica
But
Jang.
it doesn't help because spell check will fix it for you too.
Oh no! Is that true? Oh, that's awful.
Can I fangirl just a little bit though, Danny? I've seen
course.
you in so many movies. I've seen you in so many different things, and so it's cool.
Here I am live.
It's cool to talk to you, man.
Right back at you. Like I said, you're in your busy season. I was looking at the Instagram, and I could not believe the amount of events that go on for this Edgar Allan Poe Festival. I mean, the Black Cat Ball, and then are you doing the guy who does the Smith, the one-man show?
He's coming out, flying in from London. I'm pretty excited.
Which is incredible.
Now, I don't want to front too much. This year is a very special year. It's the 75th anniversary of the museum. You don't turn 75 again. So it's really exciting for us.
Is that diamond? It's diamond, is it not?
Actually, this year's crazy year. It is the 75th anniversary of the Edgar Allan Poe house. It's the 175th anniversary of Poe's death. Which is a mystery, and so that is in itself an event. It's the 60th anniversary of Masque of the Red Death, starring Vincent Price, directed by Roger Corman. So that is a big anniversary. It's the 200th anniversary of the Marquis de Lafayette's return to the United States. And if one of these things sounds not like the others, there's a Poe connection to the Marquis de Lafayette and the Poe family. So this is a big deal for Baltimore. So all those things are happening this year.
Well, Enrica, before we get too deep into Poe, we also want to learn about you. And I want to start with the most important question we're going to ask today. Doing a little research on you, I saw you online in a Cobra T-shirt, and Danny and I are both GI Joe fans.
And we're not afraid to admit it.
No, we embrace it, and so we have to ask: Are you? In fact, I have one behind me somewhere. Are you a GI Joe fan?
Yes, well, I'm a kid. I was a kid in the '80s, so the cartoons and just a really cool. It's a golden age of cartoons, I think, and so that was definitely part of growing up.
That was in your rotation?
Oh yeah, it was Saturday morning cartoons, and so you got, and then you don't, as a kid, you're not really paying attention to what rotates in. So I love GI Joe, and then later I love the X-Men, and those cartoons though were part of that's how I got into fandom. It wasn't comics first, so it's really a lot of nostalgia.
That's interesting because that's actually why I love GI Joe. Was because there were so many characters and they all were unique and sort of served as the gateway drug to comic books myself, which is how the characters of G.I. Joe were very comic book character-y.
It was very emotion heavy too, because every cartoon I watched also had the one episode that was maybe a little too scary.
Yeah, little serious for a 7-year-old. Yeah, sure. I agree.
For G.I. Joe, it was the one where everybody's melting, and I forget.
Yes! We talked about this on the podcast before. Shipwreck, he's like in some weird, crazy world, and that episode tormented me as a child.
And he kisses Scarlet, and she I'm not going to melt, and then she melts, and that was scary. And then the real Ghostbusters, the boogeyman, scared the crap out of me. I had nightmares about that character.
That's so funny. We actually talked about this with another guest before that one episode, how it scarred me as a child.
Scary. But you love those cartoons, and that's just kind of it embeds. Yeah. And with X-Men, it was Morph screaming, and Wolverine Morph, and Morph dying. So all those things.
So talk to us a little bit about, you're in high school. Are you writing in high school already? Are you are teachers going, you got a thing here, Enrica. This could be a thing. And when you went to college, we're like, yeah, this is what I want to pursue. What was the genesis of your own writing experience?
Oh man. Oh well, I was a reader, and I think that's where that really comes from. I loved books. And
what were you into as a young reader?
I was that kid who would get in trouble for reading. It's a cliche, but that was me. Because you just disassociate, and you're just sitting in class and you're reading, you're not paying attention to anything's going on, and the kids around you are like, you like to read? That's so dumb.
You like to read? That's so dumb.
As a child of the 80s, were you into the choose your own adventure?
Love those. Love the scary stories to tell in the dark books. Again, traumatizing, but awesome.
So you were already into the macabre.
Yes.
That word's going to come up a lot, as it should in this topic. So you liked scary stories. That was already a thing. Did you like horror movies as well?
I like scary books. I am not a huge horror movie fan. And again, that childhood trauma.
Is it because you can control it?
I met Robert Englund once at a horror convention. Well, actually a Dragon Con. And I didn't have enough money to get the signature, but I did want to tell him he destroyed my childhood, and he just looked at me and said, "You're welcome."
As one might.
So I'm not a huge fan. And then by the time I was old enough and could handle it, started to get into the more torture kind of movies, like Hostel and stuff. So it's not really my thing, but I love reading horror stories. So Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe and all those I love that.
So was reading something that was promoted in your household, Enrica, or did you find books yourself?
Or were they just happy that you were quiet?
I think it was that one. I do think it was that one.
At least he's quiet. Siblings? Did you have siblings that didn't read and were louder?
Well, I was the oldest, and I had the power to send them to bed early, so I had peace to just whatever. So my sister will likely tell you terrible stories of how it's bedtime. It's 4.
When did you start creating your own stories? Did it happen in high school? Did you? Yeah, that's where it began. Did you have a particular teacher that was like, "Hey, there's something here"?
When you love reading, you want to create the thing that you love. So lots of short stories, and I wanted to be a novelist, and pursued that for a while. So got into college, and I'm a recovering literature major, so that was definitely part of my life. And I did manage to write a college novel. But I was never finishing anything, and later started writing comics. And I didn't start writing comics until I was in my 20s. But I've been ever since, and started finishing projects all the time. So yeah, I've been writing comics now for over 15 years.
Is there still an itch to scratch in terms of novels? Is that still in you somewhere?
I came back to it. So to be like the writer's side, like we're talking about like writerly kind of stuff, for me it was finding your medium. So I love the idea of writing, love to, like, I was sort of struggling with slogging through, getting the words out, this kind of stuff. But then I discovered script writing for comics, and something about that structure is great because you're very limited in the number of pages you're going to be able to do. You have to kind of structure it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to 20 pages, and then you have to stick to that and figure it out and reverse engineer and kind of do that. Something about that structure led me back to novels later, because I understood I didn't have to write in order.
As a comic writer myself, Enrica, what do you think about, I remember when I first started working in comic books, and I loved the idea that you got to work in all of these sort of end of episode moments throughout the book, not just at the end of each issue, but the idea that, okay, you get to kind of go to a commercial break here. And so you have to look at the pacing, and the pacing is so much different than any other writing medium.
Yes. Well, there's pressure too because, unless you're the wonder kind who can do it all, you're working with someone who's going to look at you like 12 kinds of sideways if you try to put too much on a page, because you've got to work with an artist who can get into that mindset and draw this for you. And so that's a collaboration that I think also doesn't happen obviously with novels unless you've got a co-writer, because you're checking in with somebody and it has to change, and the vision for it does change. That collaborative stuff that happens. So
yeah, it can be both a blessing and a curse, because sometimes you don't want anybody criticizing an idea that hasn't really formed yet. You want to get it out. And on the other hand, when you're stuck, it's great to have somebody go, what about this? And you're like, oh my God, yes,
yeah.
Let's do that.
Well, when that happens, it's really great because as a writer, you have this vision of how it's going to look. When it comes to comics and you're partnering with somebody, if it really works, it's really good. I don't even remember how it looked in my brain anymore. It's become this new thing.
Music's very similar when you're working with, especially when you're recording with people. It's the same idea. Like, oh, this is what I heard, and then they come in with a part, and you're like, I don't even remember what I heard. It's this now. This is the thing. Yeah.
You create together. So yeah.
So Enrica, talk to us a bit about how you came to be involved with the museum before we get into all things Poe. Just how this became such a big part of your life, because it's been quite a few years now as well, right?
Yeah, I'm working on my 8th year.
Another anniversary.
Are you from Baltimore? I should ask. Are you from Baltimore?
No, Columbus, Ohio. Go Bucks.
Columbus, Ohio.
I followed a boy to Maryland.
By the way, I gotta tell you, we that is not uncommon. When I ask how you ended up where they have, it's not uncommon.
Oh boy, we were a military family for a long time and lived a number of different places. But he retired from the Army, and we came to Maryland. And this is the longest place we've ever lived for a consecutive period of time. This is the longest place we've ever stayed in one place. So
you're still together?
We are.
Yeah, by the way, that's not common.
Well,
just for the record.
Especially in comics, especially in music.
Just letting you know, when this story comes through, that's usually not the case. So congratulations on that in and of itself.
Yeah, well, when he acts up, I tell him, you're only my first husband. So,
sure, of course. Yeah.
We don't even have to change the subject because my worlds collided with this. I'd written a book inspired by Poe, a sequel to Cask of Amontillado called The House of Montresor, and I had edited a book inspired, a comic anthology inspired by Poe and some other literary anthologies. So I had been a vendor completely separately from Poe at a couple of Poe events. That's how I met some of the folks who worked at the house and how I met some of the board. And then when the position came up, my books were already in the gift shop. They were already selling them. So they called me in for an interview. And
hold on, pump the brakes. Wait a minute. What do you mean the position opened up? Because the Edgar Allan Poe position opening up sounds sus to me.
You going macabre again?
I'm not. I've said it once. I leave you guys to say that. Use that word now. So how did it come up, and how did you become aware that it came up, and why was it even something of interest to Miss Enrica Jang at that point?
Well, we don't know what happened to my predecessor.
Underneath the boards.
We're a tiny museum, but we are a museum, and we do find that people who work at Poe House work there for years and years and years, but eventually a position will open up, and so the Poe House had been run by the city of Baltimore for several decades, and then the city of Baltimore decided to get out of the museum business, and several historic sites were turned over to nonprofits. And so the organization I work for, Poe Baltimore, we are the nonprofit stewards of the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum. And at the time, they were looking for a new director, someone who was going to be their first full-time position.
As in boots on the ground, you actually would work at the house itself?
Yeah, and that was the position. It was me, like, every weekend. You come out, you open the museum, and you give people tours, and then that was the director, to be the director. And it's a small organization because the Edgar Allan Poe House is only 620 square feet. People come to Baltimore expecting that, Baltimore's so famous for Poe that they come expecting the House of Usher and this big, giant, spooky mansion. And instead, they find this tiny museum in West Baltimore. It is half the house it used to be, in fact, because it was formerly a duplex and it was chopped in half, and a housing project built onto it. So it's a really crazy story about the museum itself, but it's a remnant. And Poe was not a wealthy man in his lifetime. Very famous, but not wealthy. So a very humble place where he begins his career, and people are stunned when they come. But 620 square feet, and that was going to be my job.
So when he lived in it, it was still 620 square feet?
It was that unit, yeah. It actually hasn't gotten much bigger. So the duplex was 2 units smushed together. One family lived on one side, and the Poe family lived on that side. And then in the 1940s, they were building the first housing project in the city of Baltimore. The first of 5 for Black families, as a matter of fact, in a time of segregation. And the entire block was scheduled for demolition. But the Poe Society learns the last surviving home in the city where Poe and his family known to have lived is about to be lost. So they step in, beg the city to save the house. And the compromise was to chop it in half and save that historic half. So that's the reason for that strange configuration. But again, we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the museum. We've been neighbors in this community for over 80 years. So it's a big deal. But the nonprofit, when it took over, was growing and looking for a full-time director, and that was going to be someone. And then I got interviewed. And they looked at my resume and they saw my literature background and they saw the books I'd written. And one of the interviewers asked, you've written 2 books inspired by Poe. What are you going to want to sit in the gift shop and sell bobbleheads? And I'm like, I write comic books. So yes.
And can I have a bobblehead, please?
And I have this bobblehead. So that's how we got the job.
It's kind of amazing that, you didn't move there for that reason, but you already had, Poe in your background and was someone that you were passionate about, and then here you are running the gosh darn museum. And was the festival already a thing at this point?
No, we established the festival.
That's what I was going to say. This is the amazing thing because it's an incredible. It's a 3-4 day experience, right?
A little more if you count the program. So we open slowly with a bunch of different programs, and then the festival is that 3 days, and then we get great big once a year, and then we gotta suck it back up again.
What about Edgar Allan Poe?
Well, let's get into Poe himself, Enrica. And I know that the simple answer here is that people should know who Edgar Allan Poe is. But for those who don't, or who aren't familiar specifically with his work, let's start with the basics. Give us who Poe was and how he relates to this particular museum house.
Well, as I mentioned, this is the last surviving home in the city of Baltimore where Edgar Allan Poe, known to have lived. Now he had lived in a number of different places. Poe, in his lifetime, never owned property. Now that he's dead, you can visit 3 of the houses that he lived in. This one in Baltimore is the best, no bias. There's one in Philadelphia run by the National Park Service. There's one up in New York City in the Bronx. So there's a wonderful museum to Poe in Richmond, Virginia, another city where Poe lived. Was raised by a foster family there, and they have a wonderful collection.
And that foster family never legally adopted Poe, correct?
That's correct. So that's the Allan family. That's how we get the name Edgar Allan Poe. But Poe's father's family from the city of Baltimore, and long before there ever was an Edgar Allan Poe, the Poe family was noted in the city for their service in the Revolution, as well as the War of 1812. Poe's grandmother very famously sews 500 pairs of pants for the Marquis de Lafayette soldiers. Take that, Betsy Ross. So this is a big deal.
And weren't his parents actors? Is that right? Because
they were traveling actors. His mother was a British actress.
Now we understand why he was insane. Go ahead.
Well, certainly dramatic guy, kind of guy. His mother was a British actress. She'd immigrated to the United States when she was 9 years old, and from an acting family. Poe's father, though, had been raised in Baltimore to be something boring like a lawyer. And instead, he falls in love with the theater, falls in love with this beautiful British actress on the stage.
Followed a girl. See, all these stories that go the same way.
That's right. But that's how Poe comes to be born in Boston. His parents are traveling actors. They're acting there. So that kind of connection to the city of Boston. But then later, he's orphaned at the age of 3. Even though his parents are known, he's taken in by this foster family in Richmond. They give him their name, so Edgar Allan Poe.
And why not the Poe family in Baltimore? Because eventually the house that the museum is based on was his grandmother's house, correct?
Correct, a rental in their household. But the Poes, after the war, after the Revolution, there's a brief period of prosperity because there's a wheel-making business, and David Poe had been a very successful quartermaster during the war, but he also used a lot of his own money, which is very common in the Revolution. You were expected to front a lot of supplies, logistics, food, and extend your credit to do that, and then you would be repaid by the Congress, in theory.
Repaid.
You're right.
I say in quotes.
The family had given quite a bit, and not a lot of it comes back until later, and then failed businesses and things just changed for the Poe family. So when David Poe disappears from the picture, this is one of the first mysteries of Poe's life, what happened to his father, whether he abandons his family, whether he simply dies on the road. There's no record of what happens to Edgar Allan Poe's father. Poe's mother, on the other hand, is a very, again, famous actress. Fame does not equal fortune for any member of the Poe family, but she's very noted, so much so that when she's dying of tuberculosis in Richmond, an appeal is made to the public on her behalf. This beautiful light of the stage, has 3 children in desperate need of help. Please come for the last time. And she becomes kind of like a social cause for the patrons of the theater. And one of those patrons is Frances Allan, who has no children of her own, and when Eliza Poe dies, she's very keen to take in little Edgar, the little boy.
So would this be like the equivalent today, Enrica, if a famous actress was dying and asked her fan base to step up and take care of her kids?
GoFundMe? A GoFundMe for her children?
Not quite.
So was this tumultuous for him? I mean, I'm not sure I know enough about his own upbringing, but I mean, he was just in terms of what we're talking about. It sounds like he was shuffled around a lot.
Later in life, he does shuffle around simply because making a living as a writer, pretty tough to do.
Yeah, and what I found interesting was how much of it he was like writing for papers and he was a critic.
He makes his bones as a really vicious book critic.
Yeah.
Early in his life, I think what's most traumatic is that he's a foster kid and never really allowed to forget it. The family, his older brother Henry, is taken in by the Poes here in Baltimore. So the children are split up, and the older brother is old enough to remember his mother, know what's happened to his brother and sister. Edgar's only like maybe 3 years old.
Oh, God.
So enough of an impression, if you have any memories from that young, but never allowed to forget that you are not my real son. You need to be grateful for everything that I give you. And while he's kind of like this treasured pet when he's very, very little and cute, later when he starts to become you kind of feel bad for his foster parents dealing with the first emo kid. If you can imagine the kind of sullen teenager that an Edgar Allan Poe would have been, like
the original emo kid. That's hilarious.
Seriously, you can feel a little bit of sympathy for John Allen. Like, what the heck has happened? He's a Scottish immigrant, and Protestant, and he's just like, be grateful, be respectful. Like, I have to fight for all the things.
Can I just interrupt you real quick, Enrica? Did the Allens have kids of their own as well?
They did not. No legitimate ones. John Allen has a few with some other folks. And this is another kind of point of contention between this sensitive teenage son and this kind of like, do as I say, not as I do foster father who wants him to be grateful and this stuff. So you can imagine this kind of clash of personalities with these guys. And eventually that they become estranged. They fight over money, they fight over temperament, and Poe, though, because he knows who his blood relatives are, he does find refuge with his blood relatives in Baltimore. And that's the story, coming back to Poe House in Baltimore. He comes back to Baltimore and moves in with his aunt, who is taking care of her mother. And the pension from the Revolution is the thing that's paying the rent for this house, but he becomes quite close to the family. So close, in fact, that he marries his first cousin, Virginia. His aunt becomes his mother-in-law, and the three of them stay a family for the rest of their lives. But that's kind of the beginning for Poe. But we like to say Poe House in Baltimore is famous for three reasons. Poe lived there, obviously. Poe makes his chosen family there, finds refuge with people who have nothing, whereas he came from relative wealth and begrudged everything. And then 3, he begins his professional writing career. Baltimore gets to say that we discovered Edgar Allan Poe, and Poe House can very proudly say this is the house where Poe begins his professional writing career.
Well, and what's interesting too about that is, if I read correctly, he also left and then returned again. So it's almost like he thought of it as home, because he returned more than he didn't just leave and never come back.
I think he finds acceptance in a way that just was not on offer. And the Allen family were not always wealthy. He was a merchant, and then he inherits from a rich uncle, no less, this incredible fortune. And Poe is raised to believe he's going to be an heir to this money, but still fighting with his foster father, fighting over money, and again, begrudged everything. Whereas the Poes in Baltimore, not wealthy, hanging on with their fingernails, and yet they welcome him in. And it's not really clear what he's giving them. Like, it's not clear if he's not bringing money. And they have nothing, and they give him everything. You can be here. You're one of us. This is blood.
So when he was moving around to like Providence and Boston and New York and Philadelphia, he was trying to make a living as a writer? Is that correct?
Providence happens later. Okay. He's a magazine editor and a contributor to those magazines. And so you were right. At the beginning of his career, he kind of makes his bones as this vicious critic.
That's what I was reading, that he was like a vicious critic with a drinking and a gambling problem. I'm like, wow, this is what a character he is just in and of itself.
A bit of a hipster, like an original hipster too, because all the things you thought were cool about literature, he would explain why they were not cool and what you should be reading instead, and kind of get personal.
Boy, his blog would have been great, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it causes a sensation. He makes a lot of enemies, which,
That's what I was going to say. It seemed like he burned some bridges early in his career that would pay off later, or not pay off later for him.
Absolutely. And so he moves from Richmond, lives in New York, down to Philadelphia, back to New York. But he becomes popularly famous with the publication of The Raven in 1845. And what I mean by that is, as an editor and a writer of Gothic stories and a poet, he was noted by the reading public. So if you know of any editors at the New Yorker or the New York Times, or like, that's a subset of folks who know it's the reading public. But when he publishes The Raven, it is very popular.
How does he publish it? How does he actually get something published?
He's it's published in the magazine, and he sells it to the magazine. He makes about $40 on the publication of The Raven.
$40, Jason.
And it's a poem, so it can be published over and over and over again without any money coming back. There's not a lot of copyright, and like he's a proponent for copyright, an early proponent for copyright, because he sees this poem capture the imagination of the nation, fly around the world. It becomes an international thing.
How would you relate it to today if something was that big? Would it be like, and it's hard to, I know there's not like magazine articles getting that famous, but would it be like a Harry Potter or a Twilight? Like it was that pop culturally known?
A little shorter, so I would say like a song, like a pop song. It's nevermore, nevermore. It's repetitious, it's gothic, it's romantic. People are starting to make parodies and the turkey, the dove, like and it's so perfect.
It was in the lexicon. It was part
Right.
of.
So the reading public. So that song that you start to hear, and again, this is before mass media. So it's amazing that in fact happens. But he becomes a household kind of thing. You've got kids following down the street, flapping their arms, wanting him to flap back at them at the Raven, and a little bit of his performer blood too, because people purchase tickets to see him speak and of course perform the Raven.
Oh, I didn't know that he would actually perform do his own readings of his stuff.
Yes.
Oh, I did not know that.
There are no recordings of this, which is a trap. But review after review, there's note of just the way he would read, the way he would perform it.
Is that how he monetized it, or
that is how he monetized it, and that's where some of that traveling comes in after.
The original content creator as well.
And he would give talks. He would give, that generation's version of TED Talks and go talk about literature, talk about the universe, talk about different things. And that's how he could make money. People would purchase tickets to see him speak or hire him to be, an editor and help them with writing. And that's the career he was beginning to pursue. But got to remember, he dies at the age of 40 under mysterious circumstances. So this is a very young man.
Yeah, let's talk about this mysterious circumstances for a second. What do you know?
What do we know?
What do you know? I know what I know. What do you know?
Well, we know that Poe is on the road. His wife had died 2 years prior, and Poe at different times after his period of mourning and after her death, which affected him greatly, he's courting again. And he reunites on the road, he reunites with what we would call a high school sweetheart.
Oh, the Virginia gal. What's her name?
Sarah Myra Royster.
That's right, Royster.
And he's famous now, right? So that's like a different vibe.
He's a little more, but he's also notorious because he'd had a couple of scandals.
And like Jerry Lewis, he's big in France.
He's huge in
at
France.
At this point, right? Huge in France.
But he's, also whispers of his drinking and a bit of there had been scandal in New York right before his wife had died. So.
And he had gambling debts, did he not?
At this time, I don't think gambling is
as prevalent.
Gambling is actually when he's back in college. It actually is the reason he drops out of the University of Virginia. He's their most famous college dropout.
And some things never change.
Yeah, but he gets into some trouble in college, which is another thing that kind of causes the rift with his foster father. But they had been kept apart when they were very young. Now, fast forward all these years, he is a new widower. She is a very wealthy widow. And he's on his best behavior because of that reputation. And she stands to have to give up quite a bit of money. Her husband's will had stipulated that if she marries again, most of the money's going to go to their kids because he didn't want them to lose their inheritance.
Sure.
And she's being very careful and everybody's watching. And so he's on his best behavior. But the plan seems to be that he is going to travel from Richmond to New York, where he's living, close his affairs in New York, and return to Richmond to be married. And his aunt is still part of his household. She's coming with him, and they're all planning to be a family.
And this aunt was also his
mother-in-law, right?
Correct.
Right, his mother-in-law. Okay. And so, but their plans. This is a man on the move. This is a man who's planning to open a new magazine. So this is a guy who's got a lot, but he is deviled by a bad reputation and suspected of intemperance, drinking. So he's supposed to travel from Richmond to New York. He's supposed to stop in Baltimore, catch a train to Philadelphia, do a quick job in Philadelphia, head to New York, and then complete this circuit. But he never leaves Baltimore alive. Sometime around September 27th, he arrives in the city of Baltimore and promptly goes missing for roughly 5 days. To this day, we don't know what happened during those days. We don't know, why he doesn't catch the train, what's gone on. The only thing we know is roughly 5 days later, he shows up. and someone sends word to a known associate of his saying that this guy going by the name of Poe is in really bad shape. You got to come down. He's in the Fourth Ward Pools, and he's slumped over an armchair in a tavern.
He's in the what?
Fourth Ward Pools. It's the Fourth Ward Hotel. Gunner's Hall is like kind of like the hotel bar on the first floor. It's voting day. It's actually a very kind of tumultuous day in the city. You've got a lot of activity. You've got a lot of people who are hawking and trying to get, stuffing ballots and all this other stuff. So you've got a lot of just elections were pretty violent back then, and so you got a lot of stuff going on. And in the middle of all of that, Poe finally appears slumped over this armchair. The gentleman who comes to his side, Snodgrass, kind of realizes that he's either drunk or sick, and rather than get him a room in the tavern or take him home, he's thrown into a carriage, taken to the hospital, where he dies 4 days later. And the cause of death is still not known.
Was he ever conscious long-term while in the hospital?
He's not. He's kind of goes in and out of consciousness. He seems to be aware. The problem with what we know about what happens at the hospital is because just as today, when a celebrity passes away, you got a lot of people who are interested in the tawdry circumstances, and he's a famous guy, so this is media attention. And the people in his life and the people involved in the story start to behave kind of badly. Again, that spotlight. So Poe's doctor, the attending physician at this time at the hospital, is an example of this. This is a man named Dr. Moran who dines out for the rest of his life talking about the last days of Poe. And what starts as a simple death in the hospital turns into deathbed speeches, extra symptoms. He goes on tour, he writes a book, he becomes the mayor of a small town outside Baltimore. He gets charged with fraud and thrown in prison. Like, this guy just kind of embellishes the story because he's getting all this attention for it. So whatever symptoms Poe has, whatever the account, the hospital's trying to answer for the fact that this really famous guy just died in the hospital. Did they know who he was when he's shows up in the drunk tank? Like, did they take care of him? How did he die? And then there's like the stuff that goes with it, and all this attention and the entree and all this other stuff. So
it does sound like out of all the moments in his life, at this period is when he had the most to live for. A new love, a marriage on the way, a new magazine. He had things that he was looking forward to.
And who knows what could have happened if he'd been able to continue. But this is life cut short.
Wow.
And from what I understand too, all of the records from the hospital, from his death, the death certificate, all are lost to time as well, correct?
Most of it, yeah. I mean, you've got, the hospital changing names, the hospital with a bad reputation anyway, because the medical students are accused of, accepting some visitors in the night, delivering bodies, God knows from where. This is a hospital that the neighborhood almost threatened to burn down twice because of the practices that were rumored about. So
That's
you already have
sign.
this kind of like...
That's not a great sign.
No! But you had asked me way back to sort of explain who Poe is. Poe is the godfather of gothic fiction, but he's also the father of detective fiction. He is the first writer in the English language to create a character at the heart of a story whose job it is to solve a mystery by way of step-by-step observation. It's called ratiocination. It's logical steps, solve that mystery. And Poe invents this, is the first one.
The detective novel?
The detective novel. And so even the creator of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, credits Poe. Where was the detective story before Poe breathed the breath of life into it? So this is the father of detective fiction. So his death being a mystery is entirely appropriate, I think.
Well, let me take a slight turn from Poe and talk specifically about the Poe house, because in doing a little non-specific site research, I did come across some sites that suggested the house may be haunted by his grandmother. Is that something that people come to the house for?
Well, I think, yeah, you could easily say, yeah, they come to Poe House for lots of, you want to be close to where Poe was, but you also are looking for Poe. So we do have.
What is your vibe when you're in there? If you're in there by yourself, what does the space feel like? What's the air?
Feels like home.
I will tell you that I'm a bad person to ask because ghosts don't talk to me. I want them to.
That's why they don't talk to you. It's like that. It's one of those things.
You can't sit with us. You can't sit with us. I have worked in some of the most haunted places, literally in the United States. Worked in Savannah, Georgia, in a building the History Channel had declared the most haunted building in the United States. I'd lived in an apartment complex built over an old cemetery. I worked in a movie theater with gravestones still in the parking lot.
Hold on.
I knew that was coming. I knew it. I felt it bubbling up.
Hold on. Wait a minute. Hold on. There was still a movie theater that was built on a burial ground still had headstones or plots there in front of the theater.
Yes. So this is really, really cool. It's close to Cleveland, Ohio.
Of course it is.
And the apartment. So this is an old cemetery, and this happens a lot. Old cemeteries do get, the land does get repurposed, especially if there's nobody to save them. I don't know the full story of this, but what I can tell you is that it looked like somebody at the last minute saved some parts of the cemetery, because the way this place was laid out, the apartment complex was in the back, and we knew that it had been built on a cemetery, and then the shopping center with the movie theater had a parking lot, but it looked like somebody had decided at the last minute to fence off a little piece of it.
We had the same thing in Massachusetts. They built a new Showcase Cinemas when I was growing up, and it was on a private plot of land where they had a private family cemetery. And so in the middle of the parking lot, there was a fenced in area that just had a couple of gravestones.
The loading dock, the shopping center loading dock had headstones all along the back of the loading dock.
Oh
so this is great. Where are we? But I got to tell, I've worked in these places. I worked in a cemetery. They don't talk to me, and so people ask me all the time. It happens around me all the time. I do talk to people who they feel things, or they have these experiences. And even in Poe House, people have been standing right next to me and had different experiences. And I'm just waiting there like a loser.
You're willing, is what you're saying. What you're saying is you're willing. It's just not happening.
It's just not happening. So knock on wood. But I have been in the house, though, where this happens. And one of my favorite stories was this girl. When you come to Poe House, you come at the top of the hour. We give you a short talk, and then you get to wander around Poe House. You get to see and be there, climb the steps, and kind of, we're there to answer questions. We have interpretive signage on the wall. And she takes her ticket, and she's just walking. She's got her hand flat with her cell phone just resting on top of it. And she's just going around the house. But what's different about her is most people just go up, walk around, go upstairs, come down, shop in the gift shop, and then they go. For her, she's going up, she's coming down. She's going up, she's coming down. Just kind of wandering around, poking around. And I'm just, hey, it's your ticket. Take your ticket, and you get to do that. She's standing right next to me at one point, and there's a voice that comes out of the phone that says, "What date is it?" And I just looked at my computer. I was working on some paperwork, and I said, "Oh, it's such and such date." She's like, "Oh, I didn't want to know. The ghost wanted to know." She had a ghost app. She had this ghost app on her phone, and she was standing right next to me, and the ghosts were talking to her, not talking to me. So yeah, that's my favorite ghost happening in the house while I was right there.
Before we let you go, and I have a listener question that I think is apropos to end. But can you tell the listeners a little bit about the festival? Because I think it's just a fascinating thing. Can you just sort of give us a thumbnail of it?
I do hope you'll come out. The International Edgar Allan Poe Festival and Awards. This is a free community event. So we have stage, vendors, food, music, and it's just a big program that takes place right in front of Poe House. And you can come out and just have a good time, family-friendly stuff. And this is beginning of Halloween season. And it's Poe things, Poe vendors, Poe performances, readings, all of that kind of stuff. And then over the weekend, we have additional events. We do bus tours around the city. There's a coffin making workshop. We've got a lot of art workshops for kids. You mentioned the Red Mask Festival Pass, these little tents that you can go in, see performers. reenact Poe. And Stephen Smith is a wonderful performer. Hannah Raven, coming from Sydney, Australia. She is a 2-time Saturday Visitor Award winner, and she's coming out to give a performance this year. And then we have the Black Cat Ball, which is the official party of Poe Fest, and that is just a really great, it's everything you want from this gothic party. You get to be dressed up and just swan around this old spooky mansion and have a really good time with fellow Poe people.
What a way to kick off the Halloween season.
And as Danny said, I do want to emphasize that you called this next question apropos.
Oh. All right, so here's the listener question. Patty J wants to hear from you. Enrica, what do you think Edgar Allan Poe would think of his lasting legacy if he were alive today?
I think he would be extremely pleased, and he would feel this was entirely deserving. I think he might look askance at the Poe socks and the Poe, the little figure they sell at Michael's with Poe on the toilet looking in the face of a skull. Like, he would be...
He might think you sold me out a little bit rather than kept the artistic integrity in place.
Yes, so you might be a little alarmed to like walk into the gift shop and see some of that stuff. But I do think he would be pleased. And this is a man of a lot of ego. I don't think he would be that surprised. I think he felt it. I think he knew it. I think he knew it was right.
Wow. I just want to keep talking to her about Edgar Allan Poe. It's rare that you actually meet somebody that is that well-versed in a particular person.
She could do the entire Edgar Allan Poe wiki off the top of her head.
She lit off the top of her head. It's so true.
Yeah, no, it was great. I love talking to an expert who
is an expert actually.
But not only knows what she's talking about, but was a fan of the thing. You know, she was a fan before she started working for the museum, which is pretty cool because she only ended up in Baltimore by chance, more or less.
That's why I stopped. I wanted to know, like, why did she all of a sudden decide she wanted to interview for the job of the head of the Poe Museum? You know, I think it was just like, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I love this. It's an interesting thing. And how about she writes comic books? She was talking, and I was going to go, if only we had somebody who could relate to the structure and limitations of writing comics and what that is like in comparison to novel writing. If only somebody.
And I looked over my shoulder, and then I looked over my other shoulder, and I didn't see anybody. So we went on to Poe.
Well, she was a treat to talk to. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And thanks for listening.
Music by Denny Nucci. Produced and edited by the same two people you heard hosting this show because they have no friends.